this is a Saints offseason that is popping off, right? There's a Deshaun Watson temptation of the ring. That burden was taken from our plate. And now, Jameis Winston. Maybe the plan that made the most sense all along. And Nick, I would ask you too, and you did write about this a bit this morning or whenever it came out to me yesterday, but I'd ask you to kind of compare and contrast those two different realities. Like, how does a Deshaun Watson Saints team compare to a Jameis Winston Saints team? And yeah, just putting those two kind of foiled against each other.
I think having Jameis is a lot less complicated just as far as the off-field stuff. You know, the sexual assault allegations on Deshaun are still ongoing. Not that Jameis has, you know, the cleanest past or anything. He's had accusations in that himself. But the Deshaun situation is still ongoing, and you don't know how that's going to play out. And kind of that opinion forming is still going on with him, and there's going to be the civil trials, and everybody's still going to be digesting information, whereas there's a little bit more distance with Jameis, and that's really not part of the present of how it affects the team. And I think that changes things a lot right there, just right off the top, just how we talk about it, how the teammates relate to him. You know, I think there's just probably a little bit more finding that's still going on with Deshaun, and that would make it complicated. And you kind of just see how people are reacting to that still with Cleveland. And once it was over and I was able to take a step back and kind of take a larger view and just kind of see everything that was going on with that and everybody was reacting to it. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I let out a sigh of relief.
Me too, dude.
That it wasn't our thing to have to try to make sense of it. And when they gave him a $250 million guaranteed, I mean, that kind of even just changed the whole thing on top of that, because it's not just about giving a guy a second chance. It's, you know, what does this represent then? That he's put himself in a better position. And I'm glad I don't have to figure out what that means and the process and everything. On the field, I mean, obviously, Deshaun, you put him out there. I think we'd be talking today about, you know, oh, if they go get this guy and that guy there in the Super Bowl. You know, I don't think that's the case with Jameis. You know, it's still kind of, okay, they can make the playoffs, and then what happens from there? How do they support him? How can he become a better player in the system? We've seen that he can control the interceptions. Now, can he control the interceptions well? We'll have him the trust to throw 35 times per game instead of 20. And you know, what does that look like? Is he making any mistakes if he feels more comfortable throwing over the middle with Mike Thomas? Because last year he didn't do any of that stuff. And look, I think there's things they can do to support him better, though. One of the things they didn't do last year, and it was baffling, being that they were a run-first team. If you look at Jameis through his career up until New Orleans, he was one of the best play-action quarterbacks in football. And, you know, this is kind of like the, you know, number one on his resume that I think anyone will put there. And for whatever reason, the Saints only ran 29 of those attempts last year. Passing attempts as a whole with Jameis were down, so that might be part of it. But I don't feel like they leaned into that the way they should. And I think next year they should be a running team and a play action team. Those should kind of be their primary identities. And I just think there's a lot of things they can do to still support him better. Personnel being a big one. That's something that we haven't really seen much action on yet to this point. It could be a first-round pick if they go through free agency without signing somebody. I'd like to see a free agent signing and a first-round pick, because I think they're that barren. But, I mean, at least one or the other. You know, I still think there's a lot of work to do. But I think they can be a playoff team with him. But, yeah, the major difference, if Deshaun's on this team, I think the outlook for the next 10 years is set. It's not – you know, there's not this if then maybe. It's okay, the quarterback's set. They have a shot every year. What do they do to take advantage of that shot? Whereas it's still, you know, there's a lot of learning going on with James, who he can be as a player.
Yeah, and he's fascinating because of kind of the unknown ceiling in a lot of ways. Like, you still feel like it could potentially be very high. Nick, this is just a bit of it's not the most relevant question, but it's been nagging at me. Our boy, who we all love now, CD Deuce, had some mysterious tweets when this Watson stuff was going down. And I do think it's relevant maybe in terms of like what you kept. Was he told that he was maybe going to be a part of a potential Watson deal?
Look, I'm not going to say that like he didn't have better information than me, because he very easily could have had better information than me. But you know, I never heard his name in it, and I kind of feel like maybe he was trolling a little bit, you know, you saw people reacting, and maybe he was capturing that attention and was having fun with it. That would be my guess. I could be entirely wrong. I'm not saying that he didn't hear something, but the names I heard were all offensive linemen. I didn't hear anybody on defense the whole time, and I kind of feel like I had pretty decent information on what that compensation was going to be. It was Ryer was 3 first, a second or third, and Cesar Ruiz, and then as it went on, Ruiz started sounding like maybe the Texans wanted Eric McCoy a little bit more, and those are really the only 2 names that I ever heard as part of this deal.
Okay, there you go. Nick Underhill. That's why you signed him for New Orleans football. What's going on with Teron Armstead in his market right now?
So yesterday, last I heard about it was maybe around 4 or 5 o'clock. He hadn't signed anything. Typically those visits end with a signing around that time a day. He could still be, go back, weigh your options, and head back to Miami. But as of now, there's nothing there. And look, I mean, I kind of feel like with him not being signed, maybe the market's a little bit different than what was expected as he went out there. Usually, these big names persist on the market. It's usually because that, $22 million offer isn't there or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see what those numbers are when it wraps up. And look, I mean, honestly, we've talked about it. He's 30 years old. He has an injury history, and I think it's a tough investment for anybody, and someone's going to have to feel like they can absorb that and have the backup plan. And if you're paying them $21-22 million per year, that's a little bit risky where he's at in his career. So I think he would still make sense coming back if you can get him at the right price and on a contract that kind of protects you from that. And it's easy to sit here and say it, but I think the way to do it would be you sign him for a very, very nice base salary, and then there's upside to get to that $21-22 million if he plays all 17 games, and if he doesn't, then you don't have to pay it. And I mean, I think that would be the way to protect all sides, especially as he goes up, into his 30s. But if they could keep him, it'd be a great thing. He's an outstanding player. I think he's the best leader on the team. There's a case we made that he might even be like the smartest offensive lineman in the NFL. They have these, these forums with the offensive linemen, Duke Bennyweather, the O-line masterminds.
Yeah.
And every time the videos come out, it's the whole league. Like, every time it's a ton of players around Toronto, and he's teaching them about technique and pass rush theory and all this different stuff. And I think losing that would be a big hit to that offensive line and just kind of how they've developed. I think he's as much of a part of that is the coaching. And losing him would be a massive hit. If there's a way to keep him, I think it would be great. But I still think it's probably more realistic that he ends up somewhere else.
All right, Nick, so obviously with Jameis's contract, you still have cap space, and we've been talking about what to do with that cap space, and certainly offensive weapons are the thing we've been looking at all morning long, and not just obviously like Armstead on the offensive line, but obviously getting some receivers, getting some tight ends, maybe another back, depending on what happens with Alvin Kamara. So what do you see the Saints doing with that cap space? Is it offensive weapons? And now at 18, what do you expect them to do now that Jameis has signed back?
18, I think it's a wide receiver. I think it's got to be a wide receiver, even if Armstead leaves. I think that's where you have to start with it. The only way I probably wouldn't be critical of them not taking a wide receiver is if they trade up for a quarterback and get Kenny Pickett or something like that, and you kind of try to set up that succession plan. I would understand that. But if you're going to do that and you don't sign the wide receiver in free agency, I mean, again, I think it's just you're making the same mistakes as last year. So I think one way or another, they need to come out of free agency or the draft with the wide receiver. And it's weird. They have all the cap space. They would have opened it. I don't think they would have opened it all up if they didn't think they had a shot at Deshaun Watson. I think some of those moves were made thinking that they were going to be able to do that, and they wanted to be ready to make those moves. And if they don't spend it, they can roll it over to next year. So it's really not. There's nothing lost there if they don't spend it. So I still don't see them maxing out that credit card. I think they're going to be a little bit conservative. I think if they had gotten Watson, the approach would have been much more aggressive because you feel like you're right on the cusp. Whereas right now, I kind of feel like they think they have a chance, they can compete, but I don't know if it's a completely all-in type of situation. So I see them maybe doing some bargain shopping, honestly. I don't know if they're going to make that big move. And, heading into this offseason, that was kind of the message coming out of there was that they were going to be conservative, play that third, fourth wave of free agency, not necessarily be out in the forefront. So I think that's probably what they still do. But I agree. I think they need the wide receiver. you can get a tight end. I think they need to get a tight end. They need another running back. I think that's something you probably do in the draft. Alvin's going to miss some time. Mark Ingram's getting older. I don't think Tony Jones Jr. is the answer. So I think you need somebody else in that mix, start developing and to help carry that load early in the season. And I think strong safety might end up being a need. If you look at what Malcolm Jenkins did with his contract, same thing Brees did before he retired. And it was really just a cat maneuver. He cut his base salary down to the league minimum. Then they retire after June 1st. So you can take that, the money that's still on the books from the signing bonus and split it over 2 years instead of one. And that's the same exact thing Malcolm just did with his contract. So either there's three scenarios here. A, he's retiring. B, he just decided out of nowhere to play for the league minimum. Or C, there's like some weird cap maneuver happening that I just don't think would be allowed, like where he would just drop his salary. They would have gotten Watson and they give the money back. I think that would have been extremely illegal. I don't think the NFLPA would have gone for it. So I think it's probably option A. But you never know. Maybe Malcolm just wants to play for less, help him get more players. But I doubt that's probably the scenario. So I think strong safety might be a need too.
Ah, man. So, okay. So, who do you, man, I was going to ask about maybe like OBJ, a bunch of LSU players, right? Is there value maybe OBJ coming off an injury?
Well, Tyron, I mean, now would be.
And that's what I was going to say. And now you got my brain spinning about Tyron. Is he back in play if that Malcolm Jenkins thing is true?
You never know. Look, I think that's another guy too, where maybe the market's a little bit slower because they're looking for money that just isn't quite there yet. Although I did see pictures of him like off at vacation. They're in the first day of free agency, so maybe he's just not sweating it and playing it slow at this point in his life. But yeah, I mean, he was somebody that they liked, and I could see him being an option if that happens. I would probably lean toward the draft on that one just because they've scouted and drafted that position so well over the years. I kind of feel like maybe that's the place to go back for it, play to your strength a little bit there. And if you are going to spend, maybe spend somewhere else. I think it's extremely important if you take that back end and it's all new players, having a vet with some knowledge, I think would help quite a bit. And the way they like to play with all that disguise and all that stuff too, it is something that like suddenly I'm starting to be a little bit worried about defensively if you lose both those guys. Because we saw how much they bested the coverages and everything 2 years ago when they were bringing in Malcolm. And there's just so much they do back there with how everybody lines up and disguising packages and guys being on the same page. And that starts with your safety. So, having a rookie and Marcus May back there. And Marcus May's not going to probably play the first 2 or 3 games because he has a DUI that seems like he's going to get suspended for. So it might be a little bit slow going for that defense early on next year. So now the pressure's back on your offense. It's going to be interesting to see how they start. Because, I mean, if they get too far behind early, I don't know. I mean, it could be tough for them with Alvin out, being without May. So, yeah, as we're talking about this, bringing in a vet there is starting to make more and more sense as it crystallizes. But I don't know if you make a long-term decision on a short-term problem. So either way, I think they'd be fine. But I do think draft would probably be my guess on how they would address that position if Jenkins is stepping away.
Nick Underhill on Twitter. NewOrleans.football is a site. Sign up for it. Support independent journalism. It goes to Nick directly. No corporate overlords, and you get the best Saints coverage and insight. Nick, thank you so much, man.